When a boastful millionaire bet his land that no one could touch his prized German shepherd, everyone in town laughed. But a quiet boy stepped forward, hiding a secret no one expected, and what happened next left the entire crowd speechless. The sun blazed over the dusty fairgrounds on the edge of town, where laughter and music drifted through the air, and curious eyes followed the commotion at the center of the square. It was the annual Harvest Festival, an event where families gathered, farmers traded stories, and every rivalry, old or new, was reignited in the open. At the heart of the crowd stood Mr. Grayson, the wealthiest landowner for miles, with a voice that carried over the chatter. Beside him, tethered to a shining silver post, sat Titan, his legendary German shepherd. The dog's reputation was infamous, fiercely loyal, impossibly smart, and utterly untouchable by strangers. Stories of his vigilance had become local legend, and few dared get close without Mr. Grayson's approval. That afternoon, with a glass of whiskey in hand and pride swelling in his chest, Mr. Grayson declared his latest challenge. "I'll give you my finest pasture, 10 acres, rich and green, if anyone here can lay a hand on Titan." The crowd erupted with laughter. Farmers shook their heads, old men swapped knowing glances, and children pressed closer, eager for a show. One by one, brave souls tried, offering treats, calling softly, whistling with false confidence. But Titan remained stone still, eyes sharp, muscles coiled. He barked a single warning at each attempt, sending the challengers scurrying back in defeat. But on the edge of the crowd stood a boy named Eli, small for his age, quiet and mostly ignored by the town. He watched, wide-eyed, hands buried in his worn jacket. Unlike the others, Eli didn't laugh, nor did he try to impress his friends. There was something in his gaze, a quiet certainty, a history left unspoken. As the laughter faded and the sun dipped lower, Eli stepped forward, his movements calm and deliberate. The crowd parted, curiosity suddenly replacing ridicule. Mr. Grayson's eyes narrowed, a mocking smile on his lips. "What's this, then? Even the dogs on your farm wouldn't let you near, would they, boy?" But Eli only nodded, meeting Titan's eyes across the space. The moment felt suspended, breathless, before something remarkable began to unfold. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the festival grounds as the crowd's laughter faded, replaced by whispers and the hum of curiosity. Eli stood quietly at the edge, his posture relaxed but his eyes attentive, absorbing every detail of the unfolding challenge. He was the kind of boy most people overlooked, thin, with dark, thoughtful eyes and a habit of fading into the background. Yet those who truly watched saw a gentleness in him that was rare, a stillness born from years spent among animals, not people. Eli's home was a weathered cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields where wildflowers grew unchecked, and stray dogs often found shelter. He'd learned to listen more than talk, to wait for animals to trust him before offering a hand. His father, once a skilled dog trainer before falling on hard times, had taught Eli the value of patience, kindness, and reading the unspoken language that passed between creatures. "Never force trust," his father would say. "Let it come to you like a wild bird, quiet and slow." Meanwhile, Mr. Grayson relished every second of the spectacle. Dressed in his best hat and boots, he surveyed the crowd with a smirk, pride and amusement mixing in his eyes. Titan, his German shepherd, was more than a pet. He was Grayson's pride, proof of status and power. The dog's training was famous. Nobody had ever seen him back down, and most said he was more wolf than dog. "He's worth more than half the cattle in this county," Grayson often bragged, "and smarter than the men who work for me." Titan himself was a picture of strength, thick fur gleaming, ears perked, eyes sharp as glass. But beneath the surface lay a story few knew. Before Grayson, Titan had belonged to an old woman named Mrs. Rowe, who'd rescued him as a pup after he was found near death by the river. With her, Titan had been gentle, loyal, even playful. But Mrs. Rowe's passing, and the abrupt transition to Grayson's harsh training and strict routines, had changed the dog. He became guarded, his trust reserved for only those who truly understood him. Eli remembered the stories well. He listened quietly as the town's elders reminisced about Mrs. Rowe, about the gentle dog that had once accompanied her everywhere. He'd also heard the way the dog's demeanor had hardened after she died, how he'd been given to Grayson out of necessity rather than choice. Now, Titan's reputation was legend, and it was this reputation Mr. Grayson flaunted before the crowd. Eli approached slowly as the last challenger retreated, the sting of Titan's bark still ringing in the air. A hush fell. Even the dogs tied along the fence seemed to sense something shifting. Tommy, one of Eli's classmates, called out from the back, "Don't get bit, Eli, he'll tear you up." The other children laughed, but Eli barely seemed to hear. His gaze was locked on Titan, who watched him in return, silent, wary, but not aggressive. Mr. Grayson leaned against the fence, arms crossed, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "You really want to try? Boy, you think you're better than all these men?" His tone was playful, but his pride was on the line. Eli shook his head. "No, sir. I don't want to beat anyone. I just want to try." The crowd shifted, interest piqued by the boy's calmness. Eli slipped his hands from his jacket pockets, palms open, and knelt several yards away from Titan, making himself small, non-threatening. He didn't call or whistle, he just waited, breathing slow and even, eyes soft. Titan tilted his head, muscles tense, ears swiveling to catch every sound. He was alert, but he didn't bark or lunge. The crowd held its breath, the festival noise fading to a distant hum. Eli began to hum, a gentle tune, the same melody his father used to calm nervous animals back home. It wasn't magic, but it was honest, and his voice carried a kind of warmth that lingered in the air. He kept his eyes low, letting Titan watch him without challenge. Minutes ticked by. Sweat beaded on Eli's brow, but he didn't move. Finally, Titan took a tentative step forward, then another. He paused, sniffed the air, and with the smallest wag of his tail, closed the distance between them. Eli extended his hand, palm up, and waited. Titan sniffed, hesitated, then pressed his nose gently against the boy's fingers. The crowd gasped, a sound of disbelief and awe. Mr. Grayson's mouth hung open, his swagger deflated in an instant. Eli smiled softly, never rushing, letting Titan decide what happened next. The dog licked Eli's hand, tail wagging with hesitant joy. The silence broke as applause erupted, some people cheering, others wiping tears from their eyes. Tommy ran up to Eli, eyes wide. "How did you do that?" Eli shrugged, cheeks reddening. "I just listened." And in that moment, as Titan leaned into Eli's touch, the boy had done what pride and force never could. He'd reached a heart long closed off and shown an entire town the quiet power of trust. Because sometimes, the smallest voice can break the strongest barrier, and nothing is more powerful than understanding what others have forgotten to see. The applause that swept over the fairgrounds was thunderous and heartfelt, a collective outpouring of disbelief and awe. For a moment, all the noise and bustle of the Harvest Festival faded into the background. Children stared wide-eyed, parents exchanged knowing glances, and even the most skeptical townsfolk stood in silent respect for the quiet boy who had accomplished what no grown man could. Mr. Grayson's face flushed with a complicated mix of emotions, shock, pride wounded, and, for the first time in years, a sliver of humility. He pushed his hat back, trying to muster a smile. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I guess a bet's a bet, isn't it?" A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, but the mood was gentler now, touched by something Eli had awakened in them. Eli kept his head low, offering Titan a gentle scratch behind the ears as the dog's tail swept the dust in slow, contented circles. The dog pressed closer, accepting the boy's affection with a quiet that spoke volumes. Gratitude, relief, maybe even forgiveness. Tommy, unable to contain himself, burst out, "Eli, you're like a dog whisperer or something." Others chimed in, congratulating the boy, patting him on the back, and trading stories about their own animals. For the first time, Eli didn't shrink from the attention. He smiled shyly, but there was pride in his posture and a new confidence in his eyes. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, drawing the crowd's attention. "I suppose I've got some business to settle," he said, trying to recover his composure. He stepped forward, offering Eli a handshake. "A deal's a deal, son. My best pasture is yours, fair and square." Eli hesitated, glancing up with uncertainty. I don't need land, sir," he said quietly. "I just wanted to meet Titan. Maybe you could let him visit us sometimes. We have space for him to run, and I think he remembers what it's like to be free." A hush fell over the crowd as Mr. Grayson considered the request. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. For years, he'd seen Titan as an extension of his own status, an emblem of power, obedience, and control. But seeing the dog softened by Eli's touch, he was forced to question everything he thought he knew about loyalty and love. Finally, he nodded, voice softer than before. "You have my word, boy. Titan can visit whenever you want. Maybe it'll do him some good. Remind us both that a little kindness goes a long way." The crowd applauded, this time not just for Eli's triumph, but for the humility shown by a man long known for his stubborn pride. As the festival wound down, people lingered to congratulate Eli and offer warm words to his family. Old Mrs. Carmichael pressed a homemade pie into his hands, beaming. "You've got a gift, Eli. Your father would be proud." Eli's cheeks reddened, his heart swelling with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. He glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, her eyes shining with pride and a touch of tears. In the following days, news of Eli's achievement spread quickly through town. The story grew with each telling: a quiet boy, a feared dog, a boastful millionaire humbled before the whole community. But beneath the legend, something real and lasting was changing. People began to look at their own animals differently, noticing the quiet moments, the way a dog watched for its owner's return, the gentle nudge of a cat's head, the trust in a horse's eyes. Some brought their pets to Eli for advice, eager to learn his gentle ways. Mr. Grayson, true to his word, brought Titan to visit Eli's family on the edge of town. The first time, Titan ran free in the wildflower fields, rolling and barking with unrestrained joy. Grayson watched, arms crossed, unable to suppress a smile. "He looks happier," he admitted quietly. Eli nodded, kneeling to rub Titan's belly. Sometimes, all anyone needs is to feel safe, to know they're seen for who they are. As autumn deepened, the Harvest Festival became more than just a yearly competition. It was now a symbol of what could change when pride gave way to humility, when a community opened its heart to understanding. Even the adults who was often set in their ways began to soften. They invited Eli to join conversations he'd once been left out of, listened to his thoughts on animals and kindness, and learned from his quiet wisdom. And at the center of it all, Titan, the legendary dog once untouchable, became a friend to many, his loyalty expanding as his world grew larger. Because when even one heart opens, a ripple of kindness can change an entire town. And Eli's courage was only the beginning. The weeks following the festival brought an almost imperceptible change to the rhythm of town life. People went about their chores and routines, but there was a new curiosity, a warmth in their interactions, as if Eli's gentle way had become a quiet standard to live by. Titan, once legendary for his fierce aloofness, was at the center of this transformation. Whenever Mr. Grayson drove his old pickup to the edge of Eli's family field, Titan leapt from the back with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone who remembered the dog's old, wary stare. He would sprint through the tall grass, ears flapping, tongue lolling, circling back to Eli with a joy that was impossible to mistake. Eli spent hours with him, never rushing, never demanding. He taught Titan new games, simple fetch, hide and seek among the wildflowers, or simply lying together in the shade, hands buried in thick fur, both content in the kind of silence only true friends share. Titan's bark lost its edge. Now it was playful, not defensive. When other children joined in, he welcomed them too, careful and patient, his trust expanding day by day. Mr. Grayson watched all this with a mixture of pride, surprise, and humility. At first, he had brought Titan only out of obligation. A bet was a bet, and the whole town expected him to keep his word. But as the visits continued, he found himself lingering longer each time, talking with Eli's mother about farm chores, sharing coffee with Eli's father on the porch, even listening to the boy's quiet stories about animals he'd helped. One afternoon, Grayson stood beside Eli at the fence, the air heavy with the scent of hay and the distant call of crows. He cleared his throat, his voice softer than usual. "You know, son Sias, I thought I knew everything there was to know about dogs, but watching you and Titan, I reckon I've got a few things to learn." Eli smiled, brushing dirt from his knees. "It's not about tricks or commands. It's about listening, about letting them show you who they really are." For a moment, they simply watched as Titan rolled in the grass, his big paws waving in the air. Grayson chuckled, a genuine, warm laugh that Eli had never heard before. The town felt the change too. Where once the Harvest Festival had been a contest of pride and rivalry, it now became a celebration of cooperation and community. Neighbors who had long held grudges over old property lines or livestock disputes found themselves sharing stories and solutions. Children spent more time outdoors, inspired by Eli's example to treat animals with kindness and patience. At school, Eli became something of a local celebrity. Classmates asked for advice with their own pets, and teachers encouraged him to share his methods during lessons. The old stigma of being the quiet kid faded, replaced by respect and genuine friendship. Meanwhile, Titan's transformation was the talk of the town. Even people who had been afraid to approach him before now watched in amazement as he greeted strangers with a gentle sniff and a wagging tail. The local veterinarian, Dr. Peterson, remarked during a checkup. "He's healthier than ever, happier too. It's remarkable what trust can do." Mr. Grayson changed as well. He became more involved with the community, volunteering at the animal shelter, donating supplies to families in need, and most tellingly, spending time just being present, not as a boastful landowner, but as a neighbor and friend. One Sunday, as the townsfolk gathered for a picnic in the park, Grayson stood up, clearing his throat. "I want to thank Eli and all of you for reminding me that pride can be a lonely thing. But when you open your heart, you find family everywhere." The crowd applauded, not out of obligation, but with genuine warmth. That night, as Eli lay in bed, Titan curled at his feet. He felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd done more than win a bet. He'd helped heal an entire community. He knew the journey wasn't over. Trust took time, and every heart had its own pace. But the town was different now, lighter somehow, and Eli felt ready for whatever would come next. Because sometimes, the hardest walls to break are the ones around the heart, and the greatest victories are those that bring people together. Autumn deepened, blanketing the countryside in a patchwork of gold and crimson. Life in the small town settled into its familiar rhythms, yet an undercurrent of change persisted, gentle but unmistakable. At the center of it all was Eli, whose quiet courage had become a touchstone for children and adults alike. Eli himself was changing. With every new day, he found his voice growing steadier. Where once he hesitated to raise his hand in class or speak his mind among adults, now he was sought out for advice, not just about animals, but about patience, fairness, and listening. The shy, overlooked boy had become a pillar of calm, respected for qualities that had once been mistaken for weakness. Titan, too, matured alongside him. The legendary German shepherd who once guarded his trust as fiercely as a bone now trotted through the town with open confidence. Shopkeepers left out water bowls, children greeted him with giggles and gentle pats, and even the mailman, who'd always been wary, would offer a treat. Titan had become not just Mr. Grayson's dog, but everyone's companion, a living symbol of the changes rippling through the community. Yet, challenges remained. The annual town council election approached, and with it came heated debates about land, taxes, and traditions. Some elders resisted the softer, more open attitude taking root. "We can't let our guard down," grumbled old Mr. Willis at the cafe. "This kindness is all well and good, but don't forget, the world can be hard." Eli overheard such comments as he walked Titan through the market. Instead of shrinking, he paused and considered. He'd learned through his work with animals that fear often masked hurt, that change, even good change, could feel threatening. That afternoon, Eli found Mr. Grayson sitting alone by the riverbank, tossing pebbles into the current. The man looked up, surprised but not unkind. Titan flopped beside them, content in the company. Eli sat quietly for a long while before speaking. People are worried things will change too much, that they'll lose what makes this town special. Mr. Grayson nodded. I used to think strength was about being the loudest in the room, owning the most land. But I see now, it's about being open, letting folks in, even when it's hard. They talked until the sun dipped low, voices blending with the hush of the river. Eli realized that true leadership didn't always mean being in charge. Sometimes it meant asking the hard questions and listening to the answers, even if they were uncomfortable. At home, Eli's parents noticed the change. His mother found him up early, tending to the animals before school, leaving notes of encouragement for his siblings. His father, long quiet himself, began to share more of his own stories, of childhood hardship, and the mistakes he'd made when he let pride rule his heart. The town felt these ripples. More families adopted animals from the shelter, inspired by Eli and Titan's friendship. Children formed a kindness club, meeting after school to help neighbors, walk dogs, and look for ways to make life better for everyone, no matter how small the gesture. Yet not all change was met with applause. When a new family arrived in town, immigrants with little money and hesitant smiles, some residents were wary. Old fears resurfaced, and for a moment, it seemed the town might slip back into suspicion. Eli, remembering how it felt to be on the outside, organized a welcome for them. He and his friends brought over baskets of apples and jars of homemade jam, introducing themselves and offering help. Titan wagged his tail, offering the first easiest bridge. Bit by bit, walls fell. The new family found work, made friends, and their young daughter became fast companions with Eli's sister. Over time, even the most stubborn neighbors admitted that the kindness bug was catching. One evening, as frost kissed the windows, the townsfolk gathered in the community hall for a harvest supper. Laughter and music filled the air, but when silence was called for a toast, it was Eli, surprisingly, who was asked to speak. He stood, heart racing, Titan by his side. I used to think being quiet meant I had nothing to say, but I've learned that sometimes listening is the bravest thing you can do. If we listen to each other, with patience, like we do with our animals, there's nothing we can't solve together. The applause that followed was not just for Eli, but for everyone in the room, a shared acknowledgement of how far they'd come. As the evening ended and families walked home under a clear, starry sky, the town felt lighter, warmer, changed for the better. And at the center of it all, a boy, his dog, and a community, learning that the real riches of life aren't found in land or power, but in open hearts and helping hands. Because sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single, gentle step, and true strength is the courage to keep growing together. Winter's arrival was sharp and sudden, laying a blanket of frost over the rooftops and painting the world in silvery blue. The town, once bustling with autumn harvest and laughter, grew quieter. Fires crackled in stoves, families gathered close, and the long nights seemed to invite both reflection and restlessness. Eli felt the shift in the air, and not just in the weather. Change was a constant companion now, both comforting and unsettling. Some mornings he awoke with excitement, eager to face the day. Other times doubts crept in, whispering questions about whether kindness could truly last in a world so often hardened by habit. Titan seemed to sense his uncertainty. The German Shepherd would nudge Eli's hand during those quieter moments, a living reminder that trust was earned over time and that love, though vulnerable, was worth every risk. Together, they walked the snowy fields, leaving trails that sparkled in the early sun. School became both a comfort and a challenge for Eli. He was no longer invisible, but with attention came new pressures. Some kids admired his patience and skill, but a few, threatened by change, teased him for his gentle ways. "You think you're better than us, just because you can calm a dog," one boy sneered, echoing the old language of pride. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he focused on what he knew. Kindness wasn't weakness. He remembered his father's words, whispered one night as they watched snow fall outside the kitchen window. "You can't please everyone, son, but you can choose who you want to be, every single day. At home, the rhythm of ranch life went on. Animals needed care no matter the season, and the new family from town often joined Eli and his parents for chores. Their daughter, Lydia, became a regular companion, quick-witted and unafraid to speak her mind. She brought out a bolder side of Eli, and together they dreamed of making the town even better. Meanwhile, Titan grew ever more integrated into the fabric of community life. One snowy afternoon, a wandering sheepdog from a neighboring farm got stuck in the ice by the creek. Before anyone else noticed, Titan barked urgently, leading Eli and Lydia straight to the stranded animal. The rescue brought the farmers closer, forging a new sense of unity. Yet not all wounds healed quickly. Old Mr. Willis remained skeptical, often muttering about softness ruining the town. But even he couldn't deny the benefits. Less conflict among neighbors, animals healthier, kids more involved and respectful. During a particularly harsh blizzard, the power went out across half the county. Roads became impassable, and the isolation of winter pressed in. The townsfolk, rather than retreating behind closed doors, banded together. Fires and food were shared. Eli and Lydia helped clear paths, while Titan checked on the elderly, his presence a comfort on dark nights. Mr. Grayson, once known for his aloofness, opened his barn to shelter livestock and neighbors alike. "Wouldn't have done this a year ago," he confessed to Eli's father, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "Guess I'm learning what matters." As the blizzard raged outside, families gathered at Eli's home, telling stories, sharing meals, and forging bonds that would outlast any storm. Laughter echoed through the rooms, mixing with the pop of firewood and the soft snoring of animals stretched before the hearth. In those moments, Eli saw the truth his father had always tried to teach him. True strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about leaning on others, giving and receiving, risking the pain of disappointment for the promise of connection. When the storm finally passed and sunlight returned, the town emerged stronger, together, changed, and grateful. Eli stood outside with Titan and Lydia, watching the world glisten under a fresh coat of snow. He realized that though not everyone would embrace change, enough hearts had opened to make all the difference. He glanced down at Titan, who pressed close with a wag of his tail, and at Lydia, who smiled with fierce determination. They'd walked a long road already, but Eli knew their journey had only just begun, because the truest bonds are forged in adversity, and the most lasting change is born when we choose hope, again and again. The blizzard's aftermath left the town shimmering beneath a brilliant, icy sun. Icicles hung like glass from every roof, and snowdrifts sparkled across the fields. But for the first time, the cold did not feel isolating. Instead, it bound the community closer, a shared test overcome not alone, but together. Eli felt the difference in every greeting, every act of kindness, every invitation to sit by the fire and tell stories. But peace, he learned, was never guaranteed. One morning, as Titan and Eli were tending to the animals, Lydia came running from the main road, breathless and red-cheeked. "There's a fire at the Grayson barn," she cried. Her words froze the blood in Eli's veins. Fires in winter were rare but deadly. Wooden barns and dry straw could become tinder in seconds. Without hesitation, Eli sounded the alarm. The church bell rang out, summoning neighbors from all directions. Within minutes, the community converged at Mr. Grayson's property. Smoke billowed from the barn doors, flames licking at the rafters. Cows and horses stampeded in their pens, frightened and trapped. Mr. Grayson, desperate and frantic, tried to force the main doors, but the heat was overwhelming. "We'll lose everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. Eli, thinking quickly, led Titan around the back where a smaller entrance was blocked by fallen beams. Together with Lydia, they managed to pry the boards loose, smoke stinging their eyes and lungs. Titan barked fiercely, his voice cutting through the chaos, guiding the panicked animals toward safety. Neighbors formed a chain, passing buckets of water and snow. Some wrapped wet blankets around frightened horses, while others led the cows to shelter. The flames raged, but united, the town fought back, no one willing to let their neighbor suffer alone. Inside the barn, Titan darted through smoke, barking at a pair of trapped calves. Eli crawled behind him, coughing and blinking through tears, until he reached the frightened animals. With Lydia's help, they led the calves out, the animals trembling but safe. Finally, with a last surge of effort, the flames were beaten back. The barn was damaged, but most of the animals were saved. Soot-streaked and exhausted, the townsfolk gathered in the pale morning light, catching their breath and checking on one another. Mr. Grayson, usually so proud, wiped his face with shaking hands and turned to Eli, Titan, and Lydia. "I owe you everything," he whispered. "All of you." Eli shook his head, voice hoarse but steady. "We owe each other, sir. That's how it's supposed to be." The sense of unity that day felt different, deeper, anchored not just in good times, but in having stood side by side through real danger. Even Mr. Willis, old and stubborn, clasped Eli's shoulder and said quietly, "You've made me rethink a few things, boy. Maybe it's not too late for the rest of us." Back at home, Eli's parents enveloped him in tight hugs, relief and pride mingling in their eyes. That night, as the family shared a simple meal by candlelight, Eli reflected on how far they'd come. From suspicion and rivalry to a place where kindness was no longer remarkable, but expected. Titan rested at Eli's feet, head on his paws, his body still trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. Lydia, always ready for the next challenge, grinned at Eli. "You realize we just saved the town's most expensive cows, right?" Eli chuckled, the sound light and free. "I guess we did." As night deepened, the community's spirit glowed brighter than ever, fueled not by perfection, but by the willingness to try, to risk, to trust, to show up for one another, even when it was hard. Yet, in the back of Eli's mind, a new question formed. If a fire could threaten everything so quickly, what would they do if an even bigger crisis arrived? He sensed that life would always offer new challenges, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Because true strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to face the unknown, together. The night following the fire was long and restless for many. The town had managed to save most of the animals, but an uneasy tension hung in the cold air, a new awareness of how fragile everything truly was. In every house, the hush was broken only by the sighing of livestock, the crackle of hearth fires, and the low voices of families whispering hopes and fears into the dark. Eli lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling of his small room. Titan was curled up by the door, ears twitching even in sleep, ever vigilant. Each time the dog lifted his head as if sensing something outside, Eli would creep to the frosted window and peer into the night. The snow glittered quietly under a crescent moon, casting the farm in a dreamlike silver. A new sense of responsibility weighed on Eli's shoulders. He knew the days of standing in the background were over. Courage alone was no longer enough. He now had to lead and to show others that hope wasn't just a word, but a choice you made, again and again. At dawn, Eli awoke to shouting in the street. He threw on his boots and coat, racing outside to find a group of townspeople gathered at the edge of the Grayson property. The fire, it turned out, hadn't been an accident. Footprints in the snow, strange marks on the barn's walls, and a broken lantern hinted at sabotage. The suspicion was immediate. Someone from outside, maybe even one of the newcomers, must be to blame. Fear and anger sparked quickly, and old prejudices resurfaced. Some of the elders began muttering about closing ranks, about turning away strangers for the safety of all. The unity so hard won over the winter threatened to unravel in a matter of moments. Eli's heart pounded as he watched the crowd. Titan stood by his side, hackles raised, sensing the rising tension. Mr. Grayson, exhausted but proud, stepped forward, but his words failed to calm the angry voices. It was Eli who finally broke through the noise. He stepped into the circle, voice clear despite the tremor of nerves. "We don't know who started that fire," he said, looking at each neighbor in turn. "Blaming someone just because they're new or different isn't justice, it's fear talking." There was a stunned silence. Eli continued, "All winter we stood together. We trusted each other. Are we really going to throw that away because of a single night?" Someone shouted, "And what if you're wrong?" What if they did it? Eli didn't flinch. Then we'll find out together, but until then we help each other. That's what makes us a community, not a mob. Mr. Grayson, voice hoarse but steady, spoke up. The boy's right. Fear divides us. Trust makes us strong. Gradually, the anger faded. The townspeople lowered their torches, looking uncertain but willing to listen. Eli's courage had set an example, standing firm for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. The investigation began, but in the meantime, the town decided. No one would be cast out, and everyone would help repair the barn. Even the newcomers, nervous at first, offered their labor and skills. They worked side by side, mending fences, rebuilding walls, and sharing food and stories at dusk. In the process, old grudges softened. Mr. Willis, the town's staunchest skeptic, was the first to apologize to the new family, offering a handshake and a smile. "You proved yourselves," he said simply. "Guess I had it all wrong." The barn was rebuilt stronger than before, a living symbol of unity restored. During the raising of the final beam, Eli and Titan stood at the heart of the gathering, surrounded by grateful neighbors. Lydia squeezed Eli's hand, and Mr. Grayson placed a rough but gentle hand on his shoulder. "You showed us real courage, Eli," Grayson said. "Not just with animals, but with people." That night, the town gathered for a communal dinner in the new barn. Candles flickered along the tables, faces glowed with relief and pride, and laughter rose in the rafters. For the first time, Eli felt not just accepted, but truly necessary. A leader in the truest sense. As the festivities died down, Eli slipped outside, Titan at his heels. He looked up at the sky, clear, endless, alive with stars. He realized that real bravery was less about facing danger than about choosing to believe day after day. That kindness could change the world. Titan nudged his hand, and Eli knelt, burying his face in the dog's warm fur. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "We kept them together." In the quiet, Eli understood that while fear could break a community, it was trust, nurtured by countless small acts of courage, that made it whole again. Because sometimes, the truest victory is not what you win, but what you help others become. And in that moment, Eli's journey was far from over. In the days following the fire and the rebuilding, a new kind of calm settled over the town. It was the calm that follows a storm, not the brittle silence of fear, but a deep, quiet sense of having weathered something profound together. As the barn's fresh timber scent mingled with the earthy smell of thawing ground, life picked up again, stronger and wiser than before. Eli found himself at the center of it all, not by intention, but by the steady way people now sought his opinion and presence. Children came to him with questions about animals. Adults included him in conversations about town decisions. Even the mayor, a stoic man who'd rarely spoken to Eli before, asked for his help organizing the spring fair. For the first time in his life, Eli felt like more than an observer. He was a thread in the town's fabric, one that people now recognized as essential. Titan, ever faithful, followed Eli everywhere. The once untouchable German shepherd was now beloved by all. Children would call his name, and he'd trot over, tail wagging, accepting pats and scratches. He seemed to sense when someone needed comfort, lying quietly beside an anxious neighbor, or nudging a grieving farmer's hand. His loyalty, once reserved for a single master, now belonged to everyone who had shown him kindness. Lydia, too, became a fixture in Eli's days. She was bold where he was quiet, quick to laugh or challenge, never afraid to speak her mind. They balanced each other, her spark and his calm, her energy and his thoughtfulness. She brought color to his world, and together with Titan they formed an unbreakable trio. As the ground thawed and the first shoots of green pushed through the last crusts of snow, preparations began for the spring fair, a celebration that this year felt like a victory parade. The whole town pitched in. There were arguments, of course, about the best way to string lights, who should judge the pie contest, which band to hire, but laughter always followed, and disagreements ended in handshakes. The newcomers, once eyed with suspicion, now took the lead in organizing games for the children and preparing dishes from their homeland. Their stories blended with those of old families, and a new chapter for the town began to write itself with each shared meal, every combined effort. One afternoon, as Eli and Titan helped set up tables in the town square, Mr. Willis shuffled over. The old man looked awkward, a pie balanced precariously in his hands. "Made this for you, Eli, for you and your family. Figure I owe you more than one apology." Eli accepted the gift with a shy smile. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Willis. We all just did what we had to do." Willis nodded, his voice rough. Maybe you reminded us what's possible." The fair was a triumph. Lanterns glowed against the evening sky, music floated through the warm air, and laughter rang out long after sunset. Eli was pulled into dances, competitions, and group photos. Titan led a parade of dogs in a contest that ended with everyone cheering and the animals rolling in the grass. As the festivities wound down, the mayor took the stage, clearing his throat. "This year, we honor not just our traditions, but the spirit that keeps us together. To Eli, Titan, and all who remind us that courage and kindness are what make a community strong." Applause thundered through the crowd. Eli, blushing, glanced at Lydia and Titan. The trio stood together, a living symbol of all that could be accomplished when fear was set aside and hearts were opened. Later, sitting beneath the stars, Eli reflected on the long road from that first challenge at the fair, how a simple bet, a wild dog, and a gentle hand had begun a journey that changed everything. He realized that leadership wasn't about never being afraid or making mistakes. It was about believing in something bigger than yourself and inspiring others to do the same. Titan nudged him, and Lydia rested her head on Eli's shoulder. Together, they watched the lanterns flicker out, their hearts full of hope for all the stories yet to come. Because even after the greatest challenges, every new beginning asks, what will you build next, now that you know the power of unity? Spring settled over the valley in earnest, transforming the landscape with a wash of green and gold. Flowers erupted along the fence lines, birds returned in flocks, and the river sang as it danced over smooth stones. The hardships of winter and the ordeal of the fire became stories the townsfolk shared around kitchen tables, no longer wounds, but memories of how they had come together and endured. Eli felt a lightness in his step, a quiet pride blossoming inside. The boy who once blended into the background had learned to walk taller, shoulders straight, gaze open. The trust the town placed in him brought new responsibilities, but also new joys. He mentored younger children who were shy or struggling, teaching them the gentle patience he'd learned from animals and from his own father. Sometimes, the group would gather in the field after chores, Titan lying nearby as they spoke about worries, dreams, and the ways courage can look small from the outside but feel enormous on the inside. The community's bond deepened, too. The fair had become an annual highlight, but now its spirit lingered long after the lanterns were packed away. Neighbors checked in on each other more often. Disagreements still happened, about fences, livestock, or who left the church door open, but the tone had changed. Arguments were settled more quickly, and people were slower to judge, quicker to forgive. Mr. Grayson, transformed by humility and experience, started a tradition of open field days, inviting anyone to visit his land, walk the orchards, and play with Titan. Even the newcomers led classes on gardening and baking, sharing not only skills, but stories from their homeland. Their daughter, Lydia, had become a fixture in every game and project, her laughter a constant counterpoint to Eli's quieter confidence. It was during one of these open field days that Eli's father pulled him aside, a rare moment when chores were done and the world seemed perfectly still. They sat beneath an old oak, the shade cool and dappled. "I'm proud of you, son," his father said, voice thick with emotion he usually kept hidden. "Not just for what you did, but for how you did it. You listened, you let people in. That's not always easy, but it's always worth it." Eli looked at his father, realizing how far they had both come. Where there had once been awkward silence, there was now understanding, a bridge built on small acts of patience and love. They didn't need many words, the moment spoke for itself. That afternoon, Eli, Lydia, and a small group of friends organized a community project, restoring the old library, which had fallen into disrepair. Adults and children worked together, painting, repairing shelves, sorting donated books. Titan roamed the aisles, earning treats and cuddles, while the youngest kids sprawled on the rug, listening to Eli read stories aloud. With each shared project, the town's sense of belonging grew. People who had once eyed each other with suspicion now trusted that help would be given and accepted without shame. The newcomers, once outsiders, were now neighbors. Mr. Willis, who doubted every step, often led the way in offering aid. One evening, as twilight painted the world in lavender and rose, the community gathered for a picnic in the orchard. Plates passed hand to hand, stories overlapped, and music drifted through the air. Eli sat with Lydia and Titan beneath a blooming apple tree, watching the faces around him glow in the lantern light. He realized that the greatest riches were not in land or money, but in these quiet moments of unity and shared purpose. As dusk deepened, Mr. Grayson stood to offer a toast. To all who listen, to each other, to their animals, and to their hearts. May we never forget what brought us here or who we became because of it. The words resonated in Eli's chest. He leaned into Titan's warm side and felt a surge of gratitude for the journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the gentle persistence of hope. Later, as he walked home with Lydia and Titan, Eli gazed up at the stars, brighter than ever in the clear spring sky. He knew that life would bring new challenges, and that not every day would feel as easy as this one. But he also knew he wasn't alone. Together, they would meet whatever came next, with kindness as their guide and courage as their companion. Because in every ending lies the seed of a new beginning, and for Eli, Titan, and the town, the true story of community was only just unfolding. The long days of spring brought promise and work in equal measure. The fields shimmered with new crops, the orchards filled with blossoms, and the town hummed with the energy of growth. Yet, beneath this gentle surface, another challenge was quietly gathering, a threat that would test every lesson the town had learned and force Eli, Titan, and their neighbors to stand together like never before. Rumors began to spread about a corporation seeking to buy land on the outskirts of town, land that, if sold, would mean fences, roads, and the slow erasure of the valley's quiet ways. For weeks, the news was only whispers. But one afternoon, sleek black trucks arrived, and men in pressed suits met with several struggling landowners, offering more money than most had ever seen. For some, the temptation was overwhelming. "A chance to send my kids to college," one neighbor said quietly. Another muttered, "We could finally fix the roof, get out of debt." But others, especially the newcomers who'd found peace after hard journeys, feared what such change would mean for their new home. The community began to fracture, old fears resurfacing, pitting need against loyalty. Eli watched these discussions unfold with a heavy heart. He knew what that land meant, the wild trails where children played, the streams Titan loved to splash in, the open sky that made everything feel possible. He also understood the weight of hardship and why the offer was so difficult to refuse. One night, the town held an emergency meeting in the hall. The air crackled with emotion, anger, worry, hope, and desperation. Mr. Grayson stood and spoke first, voice steadier than anyone had ever heard. "This place gave me a second chance. I won't sell my land, not for any price, but I won't judge those who feel they must." Others argued, voices rising and old wounds reopened. Finally, Eli, nervous but resolute, stepped forward, Titan at his side. The room quieted. "I can't tell anyone what to do," Eli said, searching every face. "But I know what this place has given me, what we've built together since that first day with Titan. Money can fix a roof, but it can't fix a broken community. Maybe we can find another way, help each other so nobody feels alone in their struggle." The words hung in the air. Lydia spoke next, adding, "We've already proven we can solve big problems, fires, storms, even fear. If we stand together, maybe we don't have to give up anything at all." Slowly, hope flickered. Neighbors began sharing ideas, starting a cooperative to sell produce, pooling resources for repairs, setting up a fund for those in need. The newcomers offered to teach new farming techniques. Others volunteered to help with labor or watch children. It wasn't easy, and some arguments continued late into the night. But by morning, a plan had formed, a promise, signed by every family willing that the land would stay in community hands as long as they could hold it. Mr. Grayson pledged to mortgage his own house to seed the fund, and even Mr. Willis dropped a heavy bag of coins onto the table, grumbling, "Don't let outsiders run us out." The next weeks were a blur of action. The cooperative took shape. The library became a center for meetings and skill sharing, and fields that once lay fallow burst into color as hands young and old worked together. Titan became the unofficial mascot of the effort, bounding from one project to the next, his energy and affection a uniting force. At times, Eli felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, the setbacks, the lingering uncertainty. But each time he faltered, he found support, Lydia's encouragement, his father's steady wisdom, Titan's unwavering trust. As summer approached, the corporation withdrew its offer. There was little profit to be made in a place so fiercely defended by its people. The trucks left as quietly as they had come. On the night the news was announced, the town gathered for a celebration under the stars. Laughter mingled with music, and food passed from hand to hand. Mr. Grayson raised a toast. To the land, to our children, and to the courage to stand together, no matter the cost. Eli looked around at the faces shining in the lantern light. Old friends, new neighbors, and Titan, his loyal companion. He realized that every challenge they had faced had prepared them for this, the knowledge that real wealth lay not in money, but in belonging. He squeezed Lydia's hand, feeling hope swell in his chest. The final test had come, and together they had chosen what mattered most, because even when the threat is gone, the truest measure of a community is how it lives each day, choosing unity again and again. The celebration beneath the summer stars felt like a dream. Music, laughter, and the easy conversation of people who had faced darkness and come through together. Yet for Eli, a sense of quiet anticipation lingered beneath the joy, as if one last, unseen test remained. He wandered away from the glow of lanterns, Titan padding softly at his side, the night thick with the scent of grass and warm earth. As Eli reached the old orchard at the edge of town, he found Mr. Grayson sitting alone on a low stone wall, looking out over the fields. The moonlight painted the land in silver, and in that silent space, the past and future seemed to meet. Mr. Grayson gestured for Eli to join him. Titan lay down between them, content. For a long while, they said nothing. The hum of distant voices and the chirr of crickets filled the air. Finally, Mr. Grayson spoke, his tone raw with feeling. "I spent half my life thinking land and money were all that mattered. I was wrong, Eli. It took losing my pride, nearly losing my barn to understand what truly counts." Eli listened, letting the words settle. "I used to think being quiet meant I didn't matter. But Titan taught me that patience and kindness can change things more than any loud voice." Grayson nodded, a tear catching in his eye. "You changed me. You changed this whole place. You and that dog reminded us that belonging isn't something you buy or win. It's something you build every day." The words hung in the night, profound and true. Eli thought of all the moments, big and small, that had brought them here, the first timid touch with Titan, the bitter arguments and their resolution, the shared work in the fields, the cold nights when neighbors huddled together for warmth. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worth it. Suddenly, a commotion rose from the center of town, a child's shout, then laughter, then applause. Eli and Grayson looked at each other, smiled, and made their way back toward the lights. In the town square, the community had gathered for a surprise. Lydia stood in the middle, waving Eli over. "We have something for you," she announced, her voice bright. A group of children stepped forward, carrying a handmade banner. "Thank you, Eli and Titan, for showing us what family means." The words were painted in bold colors, surrounded by paw prints, hearts, and little drawings of the town's landmarks. For a moment, Eli was overwhelmed. He looked at Titan, who wagged his tail, then at Lydia, who squeezed his hand. Applause rang out as Mr. Willis, of all people, stepped forward with a medal on a ribbon. clumsy, homemade, but presented with genuine pride. "You reminded us what matters," the old man said simply. "This is just a little something from all of us." The crowd circled around, each person wanting to say thank you, to share a hug or a handshake. In the background, Titan let out a joyful bark, and the children joined him, running and tumbling in the grass. Later, as the evening grew quiet, Eli and Lydia sat at the edge of the gathering, the banner draped across their knees. She leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "You know, I don't think this is really an ending. It feels more like the start of something better." Eli nodded, emotion rising in his chest. "We faced so much, but together, we made something beautiful." As the lanterns flickered and the last songs drifted on the breeze, Eli realized that every trial, every moment of fear, doubt, or loss had built a legacy greater than any land or wealth, the legacy of a true community born from trust, courage, and the gentle, stubborn hope of a boy and his dog. He hugged Titan close, gratitude overflowing. The world wasn't perfect, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, in this circle of light and love, everything felt exactly as it should. Because while every story has an end, the legacy of kindness, courage, and belonging is the true gift passed from one heart to the next, and the journey always continues. The celebrations faded, but the feeling lingered, a warmth that filled the quiet streets and drifted through open windows, settling like gentle sunlight on every heart. As the town returned to its everyday rhythms, nothing was quite as it had been before. People greeted each other a little more openly, children played a little more freely, and even the old arguments seemed smaller in the face of all they'd overcome together. For Eli, the journey from quiet boy to quiet leader was never about winning a bet or receiving a medal. As summer passed and fields ripened under the golden sun, he found his greatest reward in the ordinary, the laughter of friends, the trust of neighbors, Titan's steady presence by his side. He saw it in the way Mr. Grayson smiled at the newcomers, in the kindness Mr. Willis now offered to strangers, and in the hope that shone in Lydia's eyes. The land itself bore the legacy of their choices. Fields shared, barns rebuilt, a library filled with new voices and stories. Each act of cooperation left its mark, small but lasting, like wildflowers blooming on a hillside, easy to overlook at first, but together creating a patchwork of unexpected beauty. Eli never stopped listening. He still walked the fields at dawn, Titan trotting close, sometimes joined by Lydia or one of the other children he'd quietly mentored. He listened to the wind in the trees, the worries of his friends, the memories of those who'd gone before. When a problem arose, a sick animal, a dispute over land, a newcomer struggling to feel at home, Eli was there, not as a hero, but as a friend. The banner the children had made for him and Titan hung in the library, a daily reminder of what they'd all accomplished. People pointed it out to newcomers, sharing the story of how kindness and courage had saved not just the land, but the very spirit of the community. And the story kept growing. The next harvest festival was the biggest yet, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who'd heard of the place where a boy and his dog had changed everything. Titan led the opening parade, tail wagging, and Eli was asked to give the welcome speech. He spoke simply, his words honest and true. What we have here isn't perfect, and it never will be. But as long as we remember to listen, to help and to believe in each other, there's nothing we can't face together. The applause that followed was thunderous, but even more powerful were the quiet smiles, the handshakes, the unspoken promises to keep building the legacy of unity, one small act at a time. As dusk fell and lanterns glimmered in the trees, Eli, Lydia, and Titan slipped away from the crowd. They walked along the edge of the fields, stars blinking awake overhead. There, Eli paused, breathing in the cool air, the sounds of laughter and music carrying on the breeze. "This is home," he said softly. "No matter what happens, we'll always have this." Lydia squeezed his hand. Titan pressed close. And in that moment, Eli felt the quiet certainty that their story, like all good stories, would never truly end. There would be new challenges, new joys, and new faces joining the circle. But the lessons learned, the bonds forged, and the hope they'd nurtured would carry on, shaping the town and everyone who called it home. And to you, watching this story, remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change an entire world. When you listen, when you stand up for what's right, when you offer a helping hand or a patient ear, you become part of a story bigger than yourself. If this journey moved you, subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, hope, and the power of community. Share your thoughts in the comments. What does home mean to you? Have you ever experienced a moment when kindness changed your life or the life of someone you know? Your story matters, and we want to hear it. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, check out our next video. A little girl raised a wolf cub. Years later, when they reunited, everyone was terrified. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing. Just like Eli, Titan, and the people of this town, together we can build a kinder world, one story at a time. Because even as this story ends, every act of kindness plants a seed for the next, growing hope, one heart at a time.